Hi, I'm Emily Richards. Are you looking for a dinner idea tonight? Let me show you how to make these delicious Canadian pork meatballs with mushroom gravy. It is going to be a new family favorite. We're going to start off with the meatballs, and I always love a nice juicy meatball, and there's easy ingredients to use to get that moist meatball, and that's exactly what we're going to start with. It's just a simple slice of sandwich bread. So I'm going to add a little bit of milk to it so that it adds some moisture, and this moisture will actually help carry over into the meatball so we have a really nice textured meatball. And I'm just going to let it sit here for a few minutes to start absorbing the milk, and then we're actually going to get our hands in there and start breaking it up. Now, let's talk a little bit about that pork that we're using, some wonderful Canadian ground pork. The ground pork is lean and it adds a beautiful texture for meatballs. I use it in all my meatballs. I combine it with beef or turkey and chicken to create a delicious texture. And this is 1 pound of ground pork. And what we're going to do is make these meatballs so that we can easily feed our family of 4 or even up to 6. Now, the other great ingredient that is always local is our mushrooms that we're using for our mushroom gravy. Today I'm using cremini mushrooms, which are the brown button mushrooms. But if you happen to have white button mushrooms, those will easily work just as well. And if you want to change it up a little bit, why not look for some wild mushrooms, because those will add some wonderful texture and a slightly different flavor as well. All right, so I'm going to tip my bowl towards you, and you can easily see how quickly that milk is absorbed. Now, if you don't want to use milk, you could use a little bit of broth or even water just to add some moisture. So what I'm going to do is just break this up, and the crust is in there too. So I'm breaking that up into smaller pieces. And what's going to go into this bowl is all of our meatball ingredients. And I'm going to start off with that 1 pound of lean ground pork. I'm also going to add a little bit of minced onion. Now, if you're not an onion fan, you could use something a bit more mild, like a green onion, or just leave it out. But I really love the flavor that the onion provides in the meatball. And I've minced it up nice and small so that it will carry into the meatball really, really nicely. Now, if you don't want to mince it, you could always grate the onion, and that will provide the same texture, nice and smooth in that meatball. A little bit of chopped parsley is going in too. And if you have other fresh herbs, this is a great place to use it. So some thyme would be lovely. Even a little bit of basil would be quite delicious. A little bit of salt is going in because we do want these meatballs to taste delicious. And to help keep everything together while still adding moisture, I'm also going to add 1 large egg. That's going to go in as well. And this meatball is a little bit of a spin on a Swedish style meatball. So the seasonings that we're using may not be ones that you use often, but they do add a wonderful flavor to this dish. I'm going to add a little bit of black pepper and allspice, just about a pinch of each. And then I'm also going to add some paprika and ground nutmeg. And I like to freshly grind my nutmeg so it has a really nice light flavor. So if you have pre-ground nutmeg, maybe just use a touch less. That's going in as well. It's about a 1/4 teaspoon of each. And now this is where the fun begins. So if you have helpers in the kitchen, this is a great place for them to come in and start mixing everything together. So I'm just kind of using my fingers to bring all the pork and all the ingredients together so that it's nice and light and evenly distributed. And it's already smelling wonderful. So just like that, our mixtures come together. I'm going to give my hands a wash, and then we're going to start rolling. All right, so we're going to need a couple things to start rolling our meatballs. And one of the gadgets I like to use is a small ice cream scoop. I find that it helps give me even-sized meatballs and moves the process along a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is just scoop some out right onto a plate, or if you have a small baking dish, that will work as well. And I'm not rolling them quite yet. I'm just scooping them all out. So they've already started kind of that wonderful meatball shape. And if you wanted to kind of get ahead of the game, you could actually make these meatballs, shape them, and pop them into the freezer raw so that you have them ready to go next time you want to make the dish. Now, the reason why I suggest freezing them is because I'm using fresh ground pork. If this had already been frozen, what I would do is cook the meatballs first and then pop them back into the freezer. It's just a great food safety tip. All right, so you can get anywhere, depending on the size of your meatballs, you might get about 20 meatballs, you might get a little less if you're making them larger. But if you want them smaller, by all means, use about a heaping teaspoon for your meatball size. I'm using about a heaping tablespoon for mine, okay? So as it comes together, the pork has absorbed all the flavor that we've put into the mixture, as well as had some time to absorb that bread mixture as well, okay? So I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm just gonna give the meatballs just a light roll because these are nice and tender, so I want them just to have that nice little meatball shape. So just a nice gentle roll like that. And if you find that the pork is sticking a little bit to your hands, just rub a little bit of canola oil on as you're rolling, and you should have no problem at all. I'm going to keep rolling these so that we can get ready to make the mushroom sauce. All right, my meatballs are all ready to brown, and that's the first step in our cooking of these meatballs. So I'm going to heat up my pan over about medium-high heat, and I'm going to add a little bit of butter. I love using the butter in this recipe because it adds a bit of creaminess to our gravy, as well as adds a little bit of flavor to the meatballs as well, okay? So I'm going to let that melt. And we want to brown just the outside of the pork first so that it kind of sets our meatballs. So these won't be the perfect round meatballs that you might be expecting because they are going to hit in the pan, and we'll have to turn them a bit to get all the sides nicely golden brown. And that will help build the flavor of our mushroom gravy. So I'm going to put my meatballs on this side so that I can finish slicing up my mushrooms. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm using some cremini mushrooms, and I just need to finish slicing them. And when you bring your mushrooms home, it's always a good idea to give them a little bit of a wipe down with a damp, I'm just using a damp paper towel, and make sure that you get any of that residual dirt off the mushroom, just like that. And if you want, you could always just give them a quick wash in some water and then pat them dry before you use them. All right, so we're gonna just slice these. And what I like to do is just take a slice off one end and then flip it over so that it's lying flat. And then I'm just going to start slicing up the mushrooms like that. Now, I'm not cutting them too thin, I'm not cutting them too thick. So whatever you do will be totally okay. And it will just make sure that our mushrooms are sliced equally in size so that they cook more evenly. Okay, I'm gonna slice up this last mushroom here, and I can hear my butter bubbling. So that means it's ready for my meatballs. So I'm just gonna swirl my butter so that it coats all the bottom of the pan here. And I'm gonna start putting in my meatballs. Leave a little bit of space in between. I'm using a nice large nonstick skillet that will help in cooking these meatballs. And by leaving a little bit of space, I'll be sure to get that nice kind of equal browning on my meatballs. There we go. I'm gonna get some in the center here. And then what I'm going to do is just give my hands a wash again and then grab another plate because we're going to be transferring these meatballs out of the skillet so that we can cook our mushroom gravy in it as well. All right, I grabbed a clean plate. I have my tongs here ready to turn those meatballs. So what you want to do is make sure that before you start turning it, that the outside edges are starting to turn white. And then as you turn it, you'll see that the bottom side is nice and golden brown. So I'll give my pan a little tilt here so that you can see the edges around those meatballs are perfect and ready to turn. So what we want to do is basically we're caramelizing and building those flavors, getting that nice golden brown color on all of our meatballs. And that really will give us a beautiful flavor for these pork meatballs. So I'm going to turn these all. And it doesn't really take that much time to get that golden brown color. And the butter certainly does help. There we go. Our last meatball turn. And we're just going to let it cook for another couple minutes to brown that other side perfectly. They've browned up nicely. So I just have my plate here that I'm going to remove them. And when you take a look at your skillet, you'll see all those delicious brown bits on the bottom of the pan. And that is why we're making this gravy right in the same skillet. So consider this a very easy one skillet meal. All right. So we don't need to add any more butter. There's still a little bit of residual butter in the pan, which is perfect for us to add our mushrooms in. So those sliced cremini mushrooms are going to go in. And then I'm also going to season my mushrooms with just a little bit more salt here. Okay. It's nice when you're cooking to have the balance of seasoning. So we seasoned our meatballs, but don't forget we're serving this mushroom gravy with it. So we definitely want to make sure that's seasoned well. So mushrooms have quite a bit of water in them. And in order to get that flavor, we want to make sure that we cook that water out. So we're looking to get a nice golden brown color from these mushrooms and let that liquid or that water evaporate out of them. So usually that takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. So this is a good time to be at the ready, stirring and keeping an eye on those mushrooms. All right, we have some beautiful golden brown mushrooms. They've absorbed the butter, so they're going to taste great. Now we're going to move on to making that gravy. We have 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour that I'm going to sprinkle all over. And what we want is the mushrooms to absorb that flour. So we're essentially cooking it a little bit so that it doesn't have that raw flavor to it. So just kind of stir it around. And once the mushrooms are well coated with the flour, that's when we're going to add our broth. Now I'm going to be using a beef broth, but if you have chicken or vegetable broth, that will work well here too. I like the depth of flavor when I'm using pork to have that beef broth. It just goes really, really nice together. All right, so I'm going to switch over to a whisk so that I can whisk in my broth. There we go. And because we cooked that flour a little bit, we should have no lumps in our mushroom gravy. But that's okay if we do, because that just means that it's a homemade gravy. Now, one ingredient that you might not have on hand that I like to add is 2 tablespoons of dry sherry. You could also use dry white wine. And if you don't have either, not to worry, you don't have to add it. You could add just a couple extra tablespoons of beef broth. I just love the flavor that dry sherry adds to a gravy. And when you smell it, it makes you feel like it's a gourmet meal. So we want to just bring this to the boil, and it should happen fairly quickly because we were using fairly high heat. And it has a deep dark color because of those cremini mushrooms as well as the beef broth. I'm going to switch back to my spatula here. And we just want to cook it for about 2 minutes so that it starts to thicken, because we are going to add those pork meatballs right back in because they're not finished cooking yet. And we want to make sure that they're cooked all the way through. So I'm going to slide my meatballs back in, and there may be some accumulated juice. We definitely want to get that into our skillet as well. And we just want to let this simmer for a few minutes so that our meatballs absorb the flavor of that delicious gravy and finish cooking. Our meatballs are almost done. They smell wonderful. The gravy is thickening up as the meatballs are simmering away. So how are we going to know these pork meatballs are done? Well, they're going to have no hint of pink inside at all, but get your trusty meat thermometer out and give them a test. So one of the reasons why we wanted them all the same size is so that they cook at the same time. But if you're unsure, you can always just test a few meatballs. So when I go in, I want to make sure that I'm in the center of the meatball as opposed to going all the way through, because I'm going to hit my pan and I definitely don't want that. So just kind of go for the center. And what we're looking for is 165. And then we will know that our meatballs are done. So I'm going around and checking, and this one just popped up to 170. So I know I'm okay. I'm going to test this one too. 167, that means that these meatballs are ready to enjoy. So I'm going to turn off my heat. I'm going to give them one last stir so that they get coated with that lovely mushroom gravy. And if you happen to have a little extra parsley, you can chop it up. Look at how gorgeous they are. Nice and golden brown, that deep, dark mushroom gravy. Chop a little bit of extra parsley and give it a little sprinkle so that you can bring it to the table and enjoy with your favorite side dish, whether it's a vegetable or a grain. It will be absolutely delicious, and everyone is going to love this.